The garden is moving forward at its own pace, but some things don't wait. My tomatoes, sitting in 1-inch cell trays, have done well up to this point, germinating, putting on their first real growth, but they've reached the stage where they can't stay in such small containers for much longer. If they do, they'll slow down, and in a growing season like ours here in Portland, that's time you don't really get back. Welcome to PDX Garden Home, where I garden in the maritime climate of the Pacific Northwest. Today, I'm potting on the tomatoes, giving them more space, a bit more depth, and hopefully a stronger start. It's a small step, really, just moving them from one container to another. But this can be where the tomato crop is decided. If they take off from here, the rest of the season begins to fall into place. And if not, I could spend the summer trying to diagnose and fix tomato problems. It's still too early to put them in the ground. Our temperatures are getting down into the 40s at night. But potting up, that's something we can do right now. So come along with me and let's garden. Well, I have got some tomatoes to pot up here. It's that time. That's one of those milestones in my growing season. And the first round that I'm potting up are some orange perouch tomatoes. Now, you'll see they're kind of floppy here, and that's because they were low on water. They were getting dry a little bit. So they'll perk back up. I've watered them just before doing this, so they'll perk back up, so that's not much of an issue. What I'm gonna do though, they're so long here, I'm going to be burying them down in these solo cups quite a bit. So I will make a hole almost near the bottom and then I'll bury the stem, which is something you can do with tomatoes. I'm sure many of you know that. I mentioned on prior videos kind of where I bury the stem for other reasons, but in this case, I actually am burying the stem with the intent that it'll grow more roots that way. Let's get into it here. Okay, so I have just planted up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 orange perouch, which sounds crazy because how will I ever grow that many of just one variety of tomato? A good question, I probably can't, but this is my favorite tomato. So I'm going to grow all of these and see which ones are absolutely the most outstanding and then put them in my garden, and I'll keep the others going as backups in case what I plant in the garden doesn't work out the first time. I'll have some backups in pots that I can then replace in the garden, and that's kind of the process that I'll work through there. I am going to, let me put a little bit more water on the top of these, and then I'll take these down to the garage. Okay, so I'm gonna finish potting up the orange perouch. I've got 2 more here, and then I'm gonna pot up these supernova, which are a saucing tomato. I tend to grow cherry tomatoes and saucing tomatoes because those are the kinds that I use. I like to eat the cherry tomatoes fresh. I like to sauce the saucing tomatoes. And then I'll usually grow like 1 beefsteak just for the glory of having that kind of big tomato growing on the vine in the garden. Hero shot of the garden, so to speak. But I don't really like eating big tomatoes like that. Another thing about tomatoes is you can get determinate or indeterminate tomatoes. I tend to get the indeterminate ones. May take a little longer for them to put tomatoes on, but then the goal is that they just kind of keep growing. I like to grow the nice long vines up stakes, and then they can keep producing for me until the rain here in the Pacific Northwest kills them, is typically what happens in my case, is that my tomatoes don't freeze, they get washed out by too much rain. Another tomato terminology that you run into is the heirloom versus hybrid. I used to, when I first started growing, I was excited about the idea of the heirlooms. And now I'd say I don't really pay attention to that one way or the other. I mean, I look at varieties that I just prefer. Shoot, I just broke the stem on that one. I bet though, if I stuff it down in this hole, it might survive. Let's see. It'll take a little longer, but it'll probably root on that stem as is. There we go. So heirloom means that the tomato that you grow, if you collect the seed, it would come true to the seed. That you could then collect the seed from your tomatoes, replant them next year, and you would get the same variety, assuming you didn't cross your tomatoes yourself by accident and the seed that you created from that. But what hybrid means is that they have created those in the lab so that they're crossing different tomatoes to get to, they have a recipe of crosses that they're doing in order to get to the variety. And so a lot of what I was going to say is a lot of your like popular cherry tomatoes and a lot of and the disease resistant tomatoes that you get these days and are hybrids. So like a Sun Gold, for example, is a hybrid tomato, very popular tomato. The orange perouch that I was planting is also I believe is a hybrid. And so if you save the seed from that and plant it, you will not get, in the case of a Sun Gold, you will not get a Sun Gold tomato. You will get, something else will pop out of the genetics and you'll get something else from it. And so that's the nature of hybrid versus open pollinated. And when I started gardening, maybe 18 years ago, there was this kind of push or concern that somehow hybridization was going to destroy the available genetics, and that we were creating a situation where we could have an Armageddon of not being able to reproduce plants. If there was some big disaster, we wouldn't be able to grow plants because we wouldn't have any seed available that actually came true. I haven't heard as much about that, or maybe I just watch different and read different people these days. But in any case, I concluded years ago I grow what I like to eat. And if it's an heirloom, great. If it's hybrid, then so be it. What I like to eat, and also what I know is going to work well in the garden. And that's, that's the other thing, is that a lot of the hybrids are things that have been specialized to grow in your particular climate or in your, or work with your conditions. And so those kind of better performing tomatoes often are hybrids. Edit note, I'm just repeating plantings now over and over again as I'm
working through this. I'm gonna have to water a lot as I'm making holes in this potting mix. It's finding it very dry. I was talking earlier about determinate and indeterminate, and I think I said that I like to grow, and said a little bit why, but I didn't really say what determinate is. So if you're newer to this, then let me elaborate on that a little bit. A determinate tomato is one where it'll only grow to a certain size and then it's done. And I think, I haven't grown a lot of them, so I can't really say this from a lot of experience, but I think it's supposed to produce its tomatoes in one flush and then that's it. It won't keep producing tomatoes like the indeterminate will, which is part of it just growing to a certain size and then stopping. But I haven't done it enough to fully observe that because, whether I grow determinate or indeterminate, I'm probably not going to get tomatoes till late July at the earliest. And then, if a flush comes on in August, that's when the flush for my indeterminate comes on. And then for my regular indeterminate, sometimes it's a crapshoot as to whether I get more tomatoes going into September and October. I often do, which is why I plant the indeterminate. But I guess my point is if I planted a determinate, got a bunch of tomatoes in August and none later, that wouldn't be too different than my underperforming indeterminate tomatoes. So, I don't know. The concept, though, you might ask, well, why would anybody want just one big flush of tomatoes instead of having tomatoes that just keep growing? It seems like you'd always want tomatoes that keep growing. Well, if you're growing for industrial purposes or farming purposes, or your purpose is you're going to grow, say, a bunch of saucing tomatoes, and you want to have them all ready at once, and then you want to process your sauce at once, having that feature of, okay, they're all ready now we're going to harvest them all, and now we're all going to make sauce, that would be a super kind of helpful feature in that regard. So that's why those exist and why they do that. I think I know this, but you guys can check me if I'm wrong and throw it in the comments. But I think earlier when I was talking about heirloom versus hybrid, if you're going back into like the primeval tomato, indeterminate would be the most natural one. I think the determinate concept is something that we bred for in order to get that feature of having a bunch of tomatoes available all at once. The idea that it's actually more the ancestor tomatoes would have been indeterminates. That's my understanding anyway, but I'm happy to be educated differently on that if you know different. The orange perouch, by the way, I didn't say this, I don't think, but it's a cherry tomato. It's like a sun gold, but it's even sweeter, and I've got a sweet tooth, so a really sweet tomato's cool in my world. Okay. I'm gonna have to put a label in each of these orange perouches so I'll know what they are, and then I'll just put one label that is intended to cover the rest of these as being the supernovas. I'll do that offline though. I won't make you guys all sit here and watch me do that. So I'll do that next. Oh, here's the supernova label. It's already there. I can just reuse that. And these were planted on March 12th originally, the seeds. Let me throw that in there. Okay, so I just need to put my orange perouche labels in. I'm gonna put a little bit of water on that, and then I'm gonna take it back down to the garage, and I will see you back here for a new round of tomatoes. Now I am doing the orange currant. I'm gonna run out of space, so I'm only gonna pot up, and I don't need that many orange currant. So I think I'll kill off some of the weaker ones of these guys, but we'll see if I have the guts to do it. Like this small guy here, not even bother. Okay. So as the name implies, orange currant is a currant tomato. That's supposed to be smaller than a cherry tomato. I find with currant tomatoes, it's often not very productive to like harvest them and bring them inside and try to use them in dishes and stuff. They're just too small. And so what I'm using a currant tomato for is snacking in the garden, which is very important. You're out here and doing all this stuff. Having the ability to snack in the garden is one of the delights, one of the luxuries of being a gardener who does all this work. All right, well, planting less creates a little more work for me in the short term because I'm not filling almost a tray or half a tray with the same thing, I need to put labels in each of these or I'll forget what they are. And even with that, there's a fair chance I'll still forget what they are, but at least they'll give me a fighting chance to keep things straight. So I'm going to pause working with you all for a minute while I make labels, and then I will come back to get into our next variety. Okay, so I've got all my orange currants labeled. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those. And the next one that I have here is the champagne bubbles. Didn't end up with a lot of those, but again, these are champagne bubbles or another currant marble size tomatoes, so I don't need a lot of those. So I'm gonna just pot those up here. Whew, it's not a very robust root structure there. All the way down in there. This white stuff you see there is light damage. Got too close to the lights and didn't appreciate it, I guess. But it'll be okay. Now, ideally the weather will come around so that I don't have to pot these up again. The next thing that I do is put them in the ground or in there, or if I'm putting them in a pot, in a large pot that they would be in for the season. But if not, then if the weather's still looking cold and we're 2 or 3 weeks from now and the root system has kind of filled this out, then I will pot them up into larger like 1 gallon containers, pots. And I will do that with some of them anyway, the ones that aren't finding a place specifically in the garden, in order to save them as backups for later. The other thing that could happen is that everything else could be ready, but I may not have my space ready because I may be holding out for my retaining wall project, hoping that I get that done soon enough that I can plant lots of tomatoes there. And so I may pot up some tomatoes into 1 gallon containers for the short term in hopes that I'm gonna have a nice new garden bed that I can put them in. Okay, so I have got 1, 2, 3 of these champagne bubbles. Well, if you have a massive hill in your yard or garden area, or you're just hilly overall, it's uneven, you might give up and say, well, I just can't garden here. But I haven't given up. What I'm doing is building this retaining wall. In fact, 3 tiers of retaining wall that cover a height that is about 12 feet in order to create garden beds that I can actually grow more vegetables and flowers in. Because at the end of the day, I love growing, I love gardening, and I also want to garden with purpose. I want to grow enough that I can see what's possible in terms of what can be generated from this driveway garden, hopefully be able to grow enough vegetables and produce for my family. I think I can achieve that, but then the next phase, the next step, which I don't know if I'll be able to do this year, but maybe next year, would be, can I grow enough to actually start supporting my community again and donating to the community? But it's all connected to this kind of project is necessary to create the capabilities for it. Well, I don't know, necessary? Are there other ways to create the capabilities? Perhaps, right? But this is the way that I envisioned, or I chose to kind of move around creating this capability. And this is very connected to the fact that I'm currently potting up tomatoes, because if you've seen all those tomato plants that I'm potted up, the only possible way that I can even plant half of those, maybe even a third of those, is if I can get more garden space sketched out in the yard here. If I can create more space through careful landscaping. And so that's why I am doing this wall project, and that's why I keep sharing it with you in these videos as we kind of look at the variety of things that are happening here in the driveway garden. Okay, my next one here is another saucing variety. These are Jersey Devil tomatoes. The seeds were planted also on March 12th. Again, I don't want to plant more than 6 of these, so I will be selective with what I do here. But these actually look pretty vigorous. The roots look okay. Okay, the rest of these I'll have 2 in each cell. If you remember, I would plant 2 seeds in each cell as backups, but then I end up in this situation where they both are there, and this one wins. I've got 1 label that I can recycle, and then otherwise I've got to make, that's 1 Jersey Devil, and then I've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've got 6, which is what I was aiming for, so I need 5 labels. So I'm going to make some 5 Jersey Devil labels to throw in here, put some more water on top of these, and then I am going to take them down to the garage. And we're back for more tomatoes. Now what I called the hero shot tomatoes, the pink oxheart, which is a large slicing tomato. And again, I've got more than 1 plant per cell, and I'm just going to cut it down to one plant in there. I don't need that many of them. I think these taste okay, but again, like a big tomato like that, I wouldn't just sit and eat on my own anyway. I prefer to eat cherry tomatoes if I'm eating raw. Some of you may be similar to me, where tomatoes were your gateway to having a gardening passion. I think tomatoes were like the first thing that I really got passionate about growing. I started growing different things in gardening, but really got into, really went at it with the tomatoes. And I think by the 3rd year of my gardening, which is over a decade ago, but by the 3rd year of gardening, I was growing 20-something different varieties of tomatoes and I'd at that point gotten into the process of growing tomatoes starts in my garage, and I was just enamored with the idea that you could grow these plants in your garage to get them started, and you could have all these different varieties. And you know what? I didn't even like eating tomatoes before that. It was on my list of things that I just would never eat. And now a good garden tomato, it's good eating. I enjoy it. I think that's a common story among a lot of gardeners or people who become gardeners. Of course, learned at some point that there's a lot of other interesting things to grow besides just tomatoes. I was obsessed with growing lots of tomatoes for a while, and I had no concept of space and how much space things took and what trade-offs I'd be making if I grew that many tomatoes. And now I do. I know that my garden would not have any of the other lovely things that I like in it if I grew too many tomatoes, if I don't try to manage it. But as you're seeing here, I'm still growing a lot. So maybe I haven't learned. Maybe it's all just a fantasy that think I've learned that I haven't really. These are looking a little wilty because, similar to another set of tomatoes I didn't water them for a day when they were a little bit dry. So I think they'll just bounce back once they're in this nice wet soil with extra room to roam around. I don't foresee a problem there. I'm going to go with just 5. I have a 6th, but it's smaller and more puny, and why bother given everything else that I'm growing here as I'm talking about this point. Okay. Speak of the devil. Okay, this next set is looking vigorous, and these are the Japanese black truffle. Probably do 5 of these based on what I'm seeing here. Just stuff that down in there. Okay. Sacrifice 1. Okie doke. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got a 5th. I've got 5 of these Japanese black truffles, and I've got 1 tag already in there. So I need to make 4 more tags. Would you know what that means? It's time for us to take a break. Next set here is white currant tomatoes. Another currant tomato, marble size. Again, this is for snacking in the garden. Now these were old seeds that I'd had from Territorial Seed that have saved for years, and I like these white currant tomatoes, but they give you lots and lots of seed in a packet. So I guess it's considered a cheaper seed, I suppose. But it's nice. It's good snacking in the garden for sure. So given that I still had some seed, I wanted to grow some more. These are also looking ragged because of a lack of water a day ago, but again, I fully expect they'll recover just fine. Looks like I'm gonna do 4 of those, and then that'll be my whole tray. Given that may be all I can do for today. Looks like I've got just a couple more varieties of things to do, so I may have you join me tomorrow for that. Well, now these are just yeah, I'm not even gonna bother with these. They're not looking good at all. So I need 2 labels for those white currants. And then I'm gonna grab over here, there's another marble tomato called the Sweet Aperitif. I'm gonna throw that one in there. Okay, so I'm gonna put 2 white currant tomato labels, 1 Sweet Aperitif label, put some water on these, even though they've got water in the basin. They don't really need water. And then I'm gonna take them down to the garage. Down to my last round of tomatoes, and then I've got some ground cherries. So I'm just doing the rest of the Sweet Aperitif. I planted one of these previously, and now I'm gonna plant what I have left of these. And okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 Sweet Aperitifs here, and I need to throw a label on those. But I'm not gonna confuse those with the pineapple ground cherries here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and plant these at the same time. One, two, three, four. Let me do one more and then I'm gonna call it good. I don't need that many of these. That'll give me 5 of those altogether. Okay, that's that. I'm gonna move these out of my way. And so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the pineapple ground cherries, and 1, 2, 3, 4 of the Sweet Aperitifs, but there was 1 Sweet Aperitif in the other tray, so I've got 5 actually planted altogether. And I have now successfully potted up all of my tomato and ground cherry, I'm treating as a tomato, plants, and these are now going to be under lights, and they'll grow for another few weeks here until we are ready to get them out into the ground, or if not, potted up into 1-gallon containers from there.
A few trays of tomatoes turned into a few pots. And if they take off from here, everything else becomes easier. In this small driveway garden, I'm constantly balancing between what I hope for and what I actually grow. Getting at least some part of the retaining wall done will allow me to grow more tomatoes. But even if that doesn't happen, I'll have some space, and we'll get some tomatoes grown. And then there's always next year, so no worries. Still, it's nice to imagine what could be: enough tomatoes to satisfy my family, and a surplus to give to friends and the community. That is what I hope for. If you're working through this stage in your own garden, I hope your tomatoes are off to a great start. Do share in the comments what's happening with your tomatoes. Thanks for gardening with me, and I'll see you in the next one.